Most people are walking through life, holding on to ideas that look like wisdom, but act like limitation. They follow advice that sounds good, but gets them stuck. They chase progress in straight lines and try to grow by checking off all the usual boxes. But growth doesn't work like that. Not real growth. Not deep, sustainable, meaningful growth that actually changes who you are. That kind of growth rarely follows the rules. You can't outgrow your patterns with the same thinking that created them. You can't build a new identity using only the tools that made the old one. You need something different, something deeper, something that doesn't just tell you what to do, but shows you how to think differently, how to see differently, how to walk through life with a new lens, not just a longer list of goals. People are overwhelmed with advice. Do more, hustle harder, set goals, track metrics, wake up earlier, push through, never quit, stay consistent, stay grateful, be patient, be aggressive, trust the process, speak your truth, own your time, honor your energy. And somewhere in all of that noise, they forget how to listen to their own life. They forget how to be still. They forget how to go against the grain when the grain leads nowhere. Growth isn't always logical. It's not always efficient. It's not always glamorous. Sometimes it's awkward. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes it feels like you're going backward before anything moves forward. And if you don't have the right mindset, if you're only looking for the clean path, the neat checklist, the obvious answer, you'll miss it. You'll get frustrated. You'll assume something's wrong with you. But the truth is, the path to real growth is rarely conventional. You don't just need more advice. You need new perspective. You need the kind of insight that doesn't come from textbooks or trending topics, but from people who've had to build something out of nothing. People who've led when no one believed in them. People who've created discipline in the dark. People who've walked through failure and came out with clarity. Because those people carry a different kind of wisdom. It's less polished, but more powerful. It's not designed to impress. It's designed to last. Growth is personal, but it also shows up in how you lead, how you speak, how you build, how you recover, how you show up on the days when it would be easier not to. You can't grow professionally without growing personally. You can't elevate your results if your habits stay the same. And you can't build influence if your integrity hasn't been tested. Real growth is integration, mind, body, spirit, language, and leadership, aligned, not compartmentalized. This is what separates people who stay stuck from people who move forward. Not how smart they are, not how lucky they got, but how they think, how they approach discomfort, how they choose to move when most people would wait. And that kind of mindset is built, not given. It's trained through experience and reflection, through challenge and honesty, through pattern-breaking decisions that don't always make sense until you've lived them. So this is not about giving you 10 easy steps. This is about shifting the way you approach your own development. It's about presenting ideas that might feel strange at first, but make more sense the longer you sit with them. It's about pushing against the usual so you can build something unusual, something rare, something that doesn't just get you ahead, but makes you proud. The first unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to get really good at doing things before you feel ready. Not just okay with it, excellent at it. Because if you wait for readiness, you'll wait forever. Readiness is a myth. It's a feeling you think you'll have when the conditions are perfect, when the fear is gone, when your confidence is high, when your timing is ideal. But that feeling doesn't come. And if it does, it arrives too late. after the opportunity has already passed. The people who grow fast, who move different, who stand out, they've mastered the skill of forward motion without full certainty. They've trained their mind to move before it's fully convinced. They understand that clarity is earned through motion, not required before it. And once you see that, everything changes. You stop living on the sidelines waiting for confidence. You start taking small, scary steps with whatever belief you have. The idea that you'll suddenly wake up one day completely confident in a decision you've never made, in a skill you've never practiced, in a room you've never entered, is a trap. It sounds nice, but it keeps people stuck because they equate fear with unreadiness. And that's not the truth. Fear is not the enemy. Waiting for it to leave is. Growth requires discomfort. And discomfort feels like fear when it's unfamiliar. But they're not the same. Fear is just the emotional signal that you're stepping into uncertainty. And if you want a better life, if you want to create something extraordinary, you're going to have to get really comfortable living in uncertainty. Not chaos, not recklessness, just uncertainty. That zone where the future isn't fully mapped and you're walking anyway. Most people treat that zone like a danger zone. They retreat. They slow down. They analyze. They hesitate. They wait for more information, more signs, more proof. But the people who thrive, they don't need a map to move. They don't need permission. They don't need to silence every doubt. They just take the next step and then the next one and then the next one until confidence catches up. Because that's how confidence works. It's not a prerequisite. It's a result. You do the thing scared. You stumble through it. You show up messy. You get it wrong. You get better. And somewhere in the middle of that, your confidence begins to rise. Not because you waited for it, but because you earned it. Waiting to feel ready before you start something is like waiting to be in shape before you go to the gym. It doesn't make sense. You train your way into readiness. You start before you believe. You act before you're certain. You stretch before you're flexible. And if you do that long enough, what once felt terrifying becomes normal. This doesn't mean rushing. It doesn't mean being careless. It means you stop waiting for a perfect mental state before you act. It means you make fear part of your rhythm. You learn to walk with it, to breathe through it, to carry it without giving it control. Because fear can ride, but it doesn't get to drive. And the more you practice this, the more you start seeing opportunities differently. You stop filtering everything through, am I ready? And start asking, is this aligned? You stop looking for certainty and start looking for alignment. If it's aligned with your values, your goals, your growth, it's enough. You move and you let the learning happen along the way. People will ask you how you made so much progress so fast, and they'll assume you had some secret, some advantage, some confidence they don't have. But you'll know the truth. You just stopped waiting. You started. You built momentum. And you let the growth happen inside the movement. The second unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to actively schedule time to think. Not just time to plan. Not just time to work. Time to think, to reflect, to consider, to evaluate. Because most people don't have a thinking problem. They have a thinking space problem. Their minds are full, but their decisions are shallow. They're reacting, not reasoning. They're operating off instinct, not intention. And in a world that celebrates speed, pausing to think feels unproductive. Sitting with silence feels lazy. Slowing down to examine your life feels indulgent. but it's not. It's essential. Because if you don't think deeply, you end up living shallow. You say yes to things that aren't aligned. You chase goals that aren't yours. You repeat patterns that don't serve you, and then you wonder why you feel off, even when everything looks right. People spend hours preparing their schedule, but almost no time asking why they're doing what they're doing. They work hard all week, but never stop to evaluate whether their work is creating momentum or just movement. They pour energy into relationships, routines, responsibilities, but never pause to ask what it's all for. Thinking time gives you the space to reconnect with that why. This kind of thinking is not passive. It's not daydreaming. It's structured. It's intentional. It's protected. You carve out a space, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe more, and you sit with a notebook, with a question, with a mind that's allowed to run deep instead of just fast. You ask things like, what's working? What needs to change? Where am I headed? What am I avoiding? What would a wiser version of me do next? You let those questions breathe. You don't rush to answer them. You don't judge your thoughts. You just listen. You capture. You think. And in that process, you find gold, insights that can't come from motion, ideas that don't surface during hustle, truths that get drowned out by urgency. When you build this habit, your decisions become sharper. Your confidence grows. You stop second-guessing yourself so much because you've taken time to know what you really think. You're no longer pulling ideas from the surface. You're drawing them from depth. And people feel that. Your presence changes. Your words carry more weight. Your plans carry more meaning. But this only happens if you protect the space, because the world will not ask you to think. It will ask you to react. Your phone won't ask you to pause. It will keep feeding you noise. Most environments are built for stimulation, not reflection. So if you don't create time to think, don't be surprised when your days feel busy, but empty. So you schedule it, like a meeting with your mind, like an appointment with your values. You put it on the calendar. You keep it sacred. You show up without distractions. You don't wait until you're overwhelmed. You make it a habit before it becomes a necessity. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need a special chair or a certain journal or the right pen. You just need space, silence, a prompt, a willingness to face yourself, and the courage to act on what you find. Because sometimes thinking will reveal things you've been avoiding. It will confront you, challenge you, push you to admit where you've been off. But that confrontation is where growth begins. And once you see the power of that kind of reflection, you won't want to go back to living without it. You won't want to make blind decisions again. You won't want to run on autopilot again. You'll realize that the space between action and reflection is where wisdom lives. And wisdom, more than hustle, is what builds a life that lasts. The third unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to learn how to lose without losing yourself. Because setbacks are guaranteed. Failure is not optional, it's inevitable. But what isn't inevitable is losing your identity in the process. What isn't guaranteed is crumbling every time something doesn't go your way. Most people aren't destroyed by the loss itself. They're destroyed by what they make it mean. They fail a test and decide they're not smart. They lose a job and decide they're not valuable. They get rejected and decide they're unworthy. They take a risk and it doesn't work. So they retreat for a year, telling themselves they were stupid for trying in the first place. Not because the setback was final, but because they let it redefine who they were. But a winning attitude, a growth-centered identity, a person committed to personal and professional expansion, They see loss differently. They don't personalize it. They learn from it. They adjust. They adapt. They don't ignore it, but they don't become it either. They've trained themselves to separate outcomes from identity. This doesn't mean you don't feel the loss. You feel it fully. You acknowledge it. You grieve if necessary. You name what hurts, but you don't let it plant roots in your self-worth. You don't replay the failure in your mind so often that it becomes part of your personality. You take the data, not the damage. You extract the lesson, not the label. You remind yourself that one result is not your whole story. One moment is not your entire identity. And the moment you can do that, really do that, you become dangerous. You become someone who can walk through disappointment and keep building. You become someone who doesn't just succeed when things go right, but someone who grows when they don't. Because here's the truth. Resilience isn't about never breaking. It's about returning. It's about coming back clearer, wiser, more focused. You will fail. You will be misunderstood. You will try things that don't work. You will miscalculate, misstep, miss the mark. But none of those things have to cost you your spirit. None of them have to make you bitter. None of them have to take your confidence. The trick is to stop making every loss so personal, to stop turning every misstep into a character indictment, to stop assuming that because it didn't work, you must not be meant for it. Maybe it didn't work because it was a test. Maybe it didn't work because the version of you that tried wasn't ready yet. Maybe it didn't work because it was meant to teach you something that success never could. You've got to develop the kind of mindset that can fail forward, that can stumble with strength, that can be humbled but not humiliated, that can walk through fire and come out wiser, not weaker. Because if you can do that, if you can lose with character and grow through pain, you can't be stopped. People who grow at a high level have all been knocked down. They've lost money, lost relationships, missed opportunities. But they came back stronger, not because they're built differently, but because they chose to process differently. They didn't let the loss become their identity. They let it become their education. So you've got to decide, when things go wrong, and they will, how will you respond? Will you retreat and shrink? Or will you rise and reflect? Will you blame the world? Or will you lead yourself through it with composure, humility, and resolve? Will you let failure define you or refine you? This is a habit. This is a mindset. This is a muscle. You don't build it by reading about it. You build it in real time. You build it the next time something goes wrong. You pause. You breathe. You don't lash out. You don't spiral. You don't quit. You assess. You own your part. You let go of what isn't yours. You adjust. You move forward. That's how leaders are built. That's how character is shaped. That's how legacy is formed. Not just in the way you win, but in the way you lose. In the way you carry yourself through the valley. In the way you hold your standard when it would be easier to abandon it. The fourth unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to measure your progress in silence. Not because there's anything wrong with celebration, but because validation should never be the reason you're doing the work. And if you only move forward when people are watching, if you only push yourself when it's visible, if you only follow through when you know it'll get applause, you've built your growth on unstable ground. The world loves loud results, loud launches, loud victories, but real growth, deep, permanent, identity-shifting growth happens in quiet places. It happens when no one's cheering, when no one's asking for updates, when no one's noticing how hard you're trying. And if your internal scoreboard depends on external reaction, You'll quit the second you feel unseen. You can't let attention be your oxygen. You have to get good at making progress privately, at becoming your own witness, at getting stronger, sharper, clearer, without needing someone to clap for you every step of the way. Because those claps don't come often, not at first. And the longer you build something that matters, the more invisible it becomes to the outside world. Most of your breakthroughs won't be visible to anyone. The moment you stop procrastinating, not a headline. The moment you didn't let fear control your day, not a viral post. The hours you spent rewriting something until it matched your standard, not a cause for celebration in anyone else's mind. But those moments matter. They're the bricks. They're the muscle. They're the proof. And if you don't learn how to celebrate yourself in silence, you'll miss the depth of your own growth. You'll keep looking outward for signs that you're okay, signs that you're progressing, signs that you're valid. But you don't need signs. You need standards. You need to know what your progress looks like from the inside. That means tracking what no one else sees. Your consistency, your self-talk, your discipline, your patience, your alignment. The way you bounced back after a bad day. The way you honored your plan even when no one would have blamed you for breaking it. Those are the metrics that matter. You stop announcing every step. You stop broadcasting every idea. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't have the context for your transformation. Not because you're hiding, but because you're focused. Because growth isn't a performance. It's a posture. It's a way of living. And when it's real, it doesn't need a spotlight. This is where maturity lives, in the quiet. In the commitment that doesn't need constant feedback. In the kind of growth that builds from within, not based on reaction, but based on reflection. You know who you are. You know what you're building. You don't need to prove it. You just need to keep showing up. When you learn to measure your progress in silence, you take your power back. You stop being emotionally dependent on likes, compliments, or recognition. You stop needing others to understand your process. You become unshakable, grounded, anchored in something deeper than approval. And people will still notice, eventually. But by then it won't matter as much, because you won't need it. The celebration will be a bonus, not a fuel source. The results will be obvious, but they'll reflect something you already knew inside, that you're growing, that you're becoming, that your work matters, even when it's quiet. The fifth unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to normalize starting over. Not because you failed, not because you got it wrong, but because growth is rarely linear, and starting over doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're honest. It means you're self-aware. It means you care more about doing it right than doing it once. Most people carry shame around the idea of beginning again. They believe that once they've committed to something, they have to stay married to the method, even when it stops working, even when it's clearly misaligned, even when every part of them knows it's time to pivot. They treat consistency like a trap instead of a tool. They confuse stubbornness for strength. But true strength, real maturity, is found in the courage to reassess, to pause and ask, is this still serving me? Is this still true for the version of me I'm becoming? Does this still align with the bigger picture? And if the answer is no, they don't fake it. They don't perform loyalty to an old path. They reset. That reset, it's not a setback, it's strategy, it's wisdom. Because starting over with clarity is better than finishing something that's no longer aligned. There's no badge for finishing the wrong thing. There's no honor in dragging a dead plan across the finish line. just to say you never quit. You have to normalize closing chapters, changing directions, redefining success, not because you're flaky, but because you're evolving. Because the person you were when you started is not the person you are today. And that growth deserves new systems, new strategies, new standards. This mindset gives you permission to adjust without shame, to fail without identity loss, to pivot with your head high. You don't have to wait until everything falls apart. You don't have to burn out or break down to make a new choice. You just need to trust that your internal signals matter, that your intuition is valid, that change is allowed. Because the people who create the most powerful lives are the ones who know how to release what no longer fits, to release the old timeline, to release the pressure to be consistent with a version of themselves that no longer exists. They don't stay in spaces out of habit. They stay because it still makes sense. And if it doesn't, they move. They don't see starting over as weakness. They see it as refinement. They know that growth sometimes means burning the old model, tearing down the structure, clearing the mental clutter, rebuilding something better, not from scratch, but from wisdom, from experience, from the lessons learned in the last iteration. This applies to habits, to disciplines, to routines. You're going to fall off sometimes. You're going to miss a day, a week, maybe more. The question isn't, can you be perfect forever? The question is, can you return without shame? Can you pick it back up without punishing yourself? Can you resume the rhythm without dragging your guilt with you? Because shame slows momentum. Guilt steals clarity. And the longer you sit in it, the harder it is to come back. But when you remove the emotion from the reset, when you make starting over normal, not dramatic, you begin to accelerate, you rebound faster, you lead yourself better. You stop judging other people for their restarts. You become someone who makes space for evolution, for redemption, for second, third, fourth chances. Because you know the real flex isn't getting it right the first time. The real flex is getting it right eventually. It's refusing to give up. It's being bold enough to begin again. So make peace with the reset. Choose it. Use it. Be proud of it. Starting over doesn't mean you lost everything. It means you're using what you've learned to move differently. And that posture, that courage, that flexibility in the face of pressure, that's what makes growth sustainable. That's what makes success repeatable. The sixth unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to get serious about subtracting. Not just about adding the next goal, the next habit, the next tool, but intentionally and aggressively removing anything that clutters your clarity. Because most people think they need more to grow, more information, more structure, more effort. But the truth is, most of the time, they don't need to add, they need to remove. Growth isn't just built through addition. It's accelerated through subtraction. When you eliminate the noise, the real signal comes through. When you stop chasing 10 directions, you finally make progress in one. When you stop trying to keep everyone happy, you remember who you are. When you stop managing the image, you start building the foundation. But subtraction feels scary. It feels like loss. It feels like giving something up. And if your identity is attached to busyness, if your self-worth is attached to how full your calendar looks, then the idea of subtracting feels like failure. But it's not failure. It's focus. It's freedom. It's the intentional removal of everything that keeps you distracted from your mission. You don't need to do more. You need to do less, better. You need fewer commitments, fewer conflicting goals, fewer open tabs in your brain, fewer people speaking into your decisions. You need to simplify, not because you're weak, but because you're wise. Because simplicity creates energy, and energy builds momentum, and momentum compounds results. This starts with your schedule. What are you doing out of obligation instead of alignment? What meetings could be removed entirely? What tasks are you repeating that no longer move the needle? What routines are outdated, but you're still doing them because they're familiar? Then move to your inputs. What are you consuming that adds stress, not strength? What are you listening to that pulls you away from your core values? What social habits distract you more than they develop you? What conversations leave you tired instead of focused? These are not small questions. They're anchors. And the more you remove what doesn't serve, the more clearly you can see what does. Subtracting means saying no. Not soft, apologetic no's, clear, protective ones. You have to learn to disappoint people in the short term so you don't disappoint yourself in the long term. You can't keep saying yes to things that fracture your energy just to avoid awkward conversations. Your vision is worth the discomfort of clarity. And the more you do this, the more you practice the art of subtraction, the more your environment starts to match your identity. Your calendar starts to reflect your values. Your energy starts to reflect your priorities. And suddenly, your life feels less chaotic. Not because you slowed down, but because you stripped away everything that wasn't essential. This habit isn't about being minimalist for the sake of minimalism. It's about alignment, precision, impact. You subtract so you can show up with full energy for what matters. So your focus becomes clean. So your voice becomes clear. So your progress becomes exponential. And it's not a one-time thing. Subtraction is a practice, a rhythm, a way of life. You come back to it monthly, weekly, sometimes daily. What can I release? What can I cut? What have I outgrown? What isn't worth carrying anymore? These aren't questions of weakness. They're questions of power. Because your legacy won't be built on how much you did. It'll be built on how well you did what mattered most. And the only way to do what matters with excellence is to stop spending your life on what doesn't. The seventh unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to anchor your life to identity, not outcomes. Because results will come and go. Seasons will rise and fall. You'll win one day and lose the next. But who you are, that has to stay solid. That has to be built on something deeper than what you achieve. Otherwise, every external shift becomes an internal storm. Most people live with fragile confidence because their entire sense of self is tied to performance. When things go well, they feel strong. When things fall apart, so do they. And that cycle is exhausting. It makes you reactive. It makes you insecure. It keeps you from building anything consistent because consistency requires a stable foundation, and identity is the foundation. You can't build a powerful life while questioning who you are every time your results fluctuate. You can't lead boldly while second-guessing your value every time a number changes. You have to root yourself in something deeper, in the values you live by, in the character you protect, in the way you show up regardless of what's working. This is the inner architecture of growth. Who am I when things are hard? Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I'm not winning? If you can answer those questions with clarity and courage, you're ready to lead. You're ready to grow beyond your current circumstances. Because now you're no longer performing, you're embodying. That's the shift. From chasing success to becoming someone who lives it. You stop measuring your progress by external rewards alone and start measuring by alignment, by effort, by faithfulness to your process, by how well your actions match your values, even when they don't match your expectations. This habit isn't glamorous. It doesn't always come with immediate payoff, but it creates integrity, and integrity compounds. It makes you trustworthy, not just to others, but to yourself. And when you trust yourself, you stop chasing the next achievement to feel whole. You lead from wholeness. You build from identity. This changes the way you set goals. Goals are important, but they aren't your compass. Identity is your compass. You ask, what kind of person do I want to be? And then build goals that reinforce that, not the other way around. You don't just want to make more money. You want to become someone who handles resources with discipline and generosity. You don't just want to get fit. You want to become someone who honors their body with consistency and strength. That internal focus creates sustainability. It means even when you miss the target, you're still building the person. And that's the real win. That's what lasts. That's what makes your progress immune to fluctuation. Because even when results waver, your values stay rooted. You stop comparing. Because now your path is unique. It's anchored. It's no longer about who's ahead of you. It's about who you're becoming. And that posture gives you peace. It gives you clarity. It gives you the kind of attitude that's unshaken by other people's pace. So you build from identity. You speak from identity. You move from identity. You treat your results as feedback, not as judgment. And when things go well, you stay humble. When they don't, you stay consistent. Because neither defines you. You've already decided who you are. The 8th unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to train yourself to embrace tension instead of trying to eliminate it. Because most people think the goal is comfort, stability, harmony. They think if they can just remove the stress, remove the friction, remove the pull in different directions, then they'll finally grow. But that's not how growth works. Growth lives inside of tension. It's uncomfortable by design. You're not supposed to feel fully balanced all the time. You're not supposed to have every answer before you move. You're not supposed to feel peaceful in every decision. If you're growing, tension will be part of your life. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because you're evolving. Because you're stepping into spaces you've never mastered. Because you're leading in ways you've never led. The presence of tension doesn't mean something's broken. It means something's happening. It means something is stretching. It means you're living in that sacred middle ground between who you were and who you're becoming. And if you can stay with that tension instead of trying to escape it, you'll start unlocking levels most people never reach. But most people rush to remove it. They make quick decisions to relieve the discomfort. They give up on projects the moment they feel resistance. They avoid hard conversations because they want to keep the peace. But peace built on avoidance is fragile. It cracks under pressure. Real peace is built on strength, on clarity, on the willingness to hold tension until you find the right next move, not just the easiest one. Tension shows up everywhere, in leadership, in creativity, in relationships, in identity. You'll feel the pull between rest and discipline, between being kind and being clear, between being firm and being flexible, between staying and pivoting. And the goal isn't to eliminate that pull. It's to learn how to stand in it, to let it shape you, to let it refine your perspective, your posture, your process. This is emotional strength, the ability to carry contradiction without collapsing, the ability to move forward even while you feel the stretch, the ability to hold your center while multiple things are calling for your attention. And that strength, that's what makes you unshakable. Not the absence of pressure, but the ability to lead through it. When you train for tension, you stop needing everything to be simple. You stop requiring everything to be obvious. You learn to breathe in complexity, to operate in ambiguity, to carry vision and patience at the same time. You stop rushing decisions just to get relief. You start holding decisions until they're ready. This shift changes how you show up with other people. You stop rushing them to clarity. You give them space to wrestle with things. You learn to hold space without needing immediate answers. You become a better leader, a better friend, a better human, because you've learned how to be with people who are growing, not just people who are performing. Tension doesn't always feel good, but it always teaches. It teaches you where your edges are, where your beliefs need to be refined, where your strategies need to evolve, where your communication needs to level up. It's not something to fear. It's something to respect, to learn from, to move with. So stop resenting the tension. Stop trying to make everything easy. Stop assuming that discomfort means you've gone off course. It doesn't. It often means you're right on schedule, right in the middle of a breakthrough, right where growth is happening. And if you stay with it, breathe through it, lead through it, you won't just grow, you'll expand. The 9th unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to practice keeping your word to yourself above all else. Not just promises to others, not just public commitments, but the quiet ones, the ones no one knows about but you. Because that's where self-respect lives. That's where inner confidence is built. Not from how loud you are, but from how consistent you are with yourself when no one's watching. Most people are better at keeping their word to others than they are to themselves. They'll show up for appointments. They'll meet deadlines. They'll avoid disappointing someone else. But when it comes to the promise they made in their journal, the goal they set with no witness, the schedule they designed with full intention, they compromise it again and again. Not because they don't care, but because they've normalized self-negotiation. They say they'll wake up early but hit snooze. They say they'll stop complaining but spiral again by noon. They say they'll stretch, write, read, plan, but they skip it saying, it's just me. But that mindset is where self-trust erodes. And when you don't trust yourself, you stop setting real goals. You stop dreaming in full color. You stop believing that your word means anything. A winning attitude begins where self-trust begins, with one decision followed by one action, repeated often. It starts with being impeccable with your word to yourself. If you say it, you do it. Not for external credibility, but for internal credibility. Because when you trust yourself, you walk differently. You speak differently. You don't need constant motivation. You just execute. You start small. You stop making promises that sound good but have no plan. You stop pretending your energy is infinite. You stop setting yourself up to fail. You set a simple standard. What I say to myself, I take seriously. If I commit to it, I follow through. And if I miss it, I don't spiral. I reset. I recommit. I stay with the rhythm. This practice builds integrity from the inside out. It creates a grounded confidence that no one can give you and no one can take away, because it's not based on applause. It's not based on likes. It's not based on validation. It's based on who you are in the dark, on how you move when it's just you. Keeping your word to yourself builds resilience, because when you trust yourself, you're less shaken when things don't go as planned. You don't panic when things fall apart. You don't blame others. You adjust. You lead. Because you practice showing up even when it wasn't easy, even when you didn't feel like it, even when no one would have known if you skipped it. This practice makes you more compassionate, because once you've held yourself to a higher standard, and once you've failed and returned anyway, you learn to extend grace without lowering standards. You know how hard it is. And you also know what's possible. So you become someone who inspires, not just by words, but by example. People will ask how you built your mindset, how you stay so consistent, how you manage to keep growing when others are burning out. And the answer won't be a secret system or some brilliant hack. The answer will be this: I keep my word to myself. I live in alignment with what I say I want, and I don't make exceptions. Not often, not easily, not without reason. So if you want to grow, really grow, start here. Start with your word. Start with the promises no one sees. Start with the early morning decision, the mid-afternoon reset, the late night pause where you choose to stay in the rhythm instead of making another excuse. That's where your future is being built, quietly, faithfully. One decision at a time. The 10th unconventional tip for personal and professional growth is to stop chasing balance and start chasing alignment. Because balance sounds nice. It's polite. It's socially acceptable. It looks good on paper. But for most people, it becomes a trap. A rigid idea that every part of your life should get equal time, equal energy, equal focus every single day. And that's not realistic. That's not how growth works. That's not how greatness works. Balance says you should keep all things steady. Alignment says you should give the most energy to what matters most right now. Balance demands symmetry. Alignment demands honesty. And when you stop trying to live a life that looks balanced and start building a life that feels aligned, everything starts to change. Because growth isn't a math problem. It's not about giving 10% to every category of your life. Some seasons will require more from your work. Some will demand more from your relationships. Some will call you inward into silence and rebuilding. Others will push you outward into execution and exposure. Balance tells you that any tilt means failure. Alignment tells you that intentional tilt is how you build momentum. Most people feel guilty when they lean too far in one direction. But guilt isn't always a signal of misalignment. It's often just an echo of unrealistic expectations. You're not failing if your life isn't balanced. You're growing, you're focused, you're building. And when you're building something important, it takes weight, it takes priority. It requires you to let go of some things for now, not forever, but for now. Alignment isn't static. It shifts with your values, your season, your capacity. So you have to stay aware. You have to ask real questions. Where am I being called to lead right now? What part of my life needs more of me? What can I say no to for the sake of what matters most today? These questions will serve you more than any myth of perfect daily balance ever will. And when you live this way, you stop apologizing for your focus. You stop pretending to be equally available to everything and everyone. You become more present because you're not trying to be everywhere. You become more effective because you've stopped stretching yourself so thin just to check all the boxes. You're not checking boxes. You're making decisions on purpose, with clarity, with courage. People might not understand your alignment. That's okay. You're not living to be understood. You're living to be aligned. And aligned people are magnetic, not because they're everywhere, but because they're fully present wherever they are. They walk with confidence, not because they have it all figured out, but because they know where their energy belongs today. This is how you avoid burnout. Not by doing less, but by doing the right things. Not by living in fear of overcommitting, but by choosing what's worth committing to. You don't need a perfectly balanced calendar. You need a deeply aligned life, one that reflects your values, your purpose, your priorities, one that's built on intention, not obligation. And yes, alignment requires sacrifice, but it's not sacrifice without return. You give something up, but you gain momentum. You let something go, but you create depth. You say no to something today so you can say yes to something greater tomorrow. That's not loss. That's leadership. So build your life in alignment, not by trying to keep everything in perfect harmony, but by moving with clarity and purpose. Some days will be messy. Some seasons will be lopsided. But if you stay aligned, if you stay honest with your energy, your direction, your truth, you won't just grow. You'll evolve. And that evolution won't be pretty every day, but it will be real. And real is what creates legacy. Now you know the truth. Real growth doesn't always look like what the world tells you it should. It's not always structured. It's not always pretty. It's not always easy to explain. But it's yours to build, yours to lead, yours to live. And these 10 unconventional habits, starting before you feel ready, scheduling time to think, learning how to lose without losing yourself, measuring your progress in silence, normalizing starting over, subtracting what doesn't serve, anchoring to identity over outcomes, embracing tension, keeping your word to yourself, and choosing alignment over balance. These are not tricks. They're not trends. They're truths. They're the kind of truths that last, the kind that hold you together when you're building something that matters, the kind that don't always get talked about in the rooms full of hype and hustle, but they're what separate those who build with depth from those who build for attention. Growth will ask a lot from you. It'll stretch you, break your patterns, pull you out of your comfort. It'll confront who you've been and challenge who you want to become. But if you carry these habits, if you live them, not just visit them, then every challenge becomes an opportunity. Every obstacle becomes a lesson. Every season becomes a stage for your next evolution. You won't need external permission to lead. You won't need applause to keep going. You won't need everything to go right to stay grounded. You'll walk differently, not because you're better, but because you're clear. You're anchored. You're building something real. And real things don't shake when the wind shows up. They stand because the foundation is there. So don't just hear these ideas, use them. Take one and start living it. One decision, one shift, one quiet commitment that no one sees but you. And then do it again tomorrow and the day after that. Until it's no longer something you do, it's who you are. That's when the game changes. Because growth isn't a moment. It's a lifestyle. It's not a finish line. It's a way of moving through the world with depth, with focus, with a kind of internal strength that doesn't fade when life gets hard. That's what you're building now. That's what you've already started. Keep going.